Hi, everybody. Good morning. We are joined for our first virtual participant, virtual lecturer, Chris Castro today, and welcome to our online audience. Thanks for your patience. The topic today is the IRA and energy justice. We're going to be talking about the IRA a lot this semester. Chris was gracious enough as somebody with a bird's eye view to join us to give us an overview of the IRA. He'll be grazing on a bunch of topics that have to do with Justice 40 and energy justice, which is central to his job. But we also have a number of other guest speakers this semester who are going to go into some of the details of how federal agencies and other agencies and philanthropy and others are approaching the Justice 40 dream or mandates. In any case, I'm really pleased to welcome Chris today. Chris is the Chief of Staff for the Office of State and Community Energy Programs at DOE, which is really the front line of engaging the largest recipient of IRA monies in the federal government. He's a native of not Hawaii, but of Miami. He was the Director of Sustainability and Resilience in the city of Orlando, as well as an advisor to its mayor, and has been a co-founder of a number of both social and business enterprises, including Ideas for Us, Citizen Energy, a clean energy consulting firm, and Fleet Farming. He was also a founding director launching the Climate First Bank, the first B Corp community bank in Florida, working to advance ESG and local investing for sustainability and decarbonization. I spent some time with him on the phone last week. He's incredibly energetic and enthusiastic about the IRA, and I want to welcome him as our speaker today about that. So thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Professor, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all both virtually. Sorry, I can't be there in person at Yale. I would probably much rather be there than here at the Department of Energy. But I am honored to be here with you all this morning, and as mentioned, I'm here to shed some light on how the Department of Energy is fielding all of this new climate and justice funding that is coming down the pike, and really introduce you all to some new offices and new programs that have launched here at the Department of Energy to truly not only accelerate the clean energy transition, but do so with the focus on kind of the place and at the local level, as well as on equity and justice as we make this big pivot. As briefly mentioned, I'm coming at this work from a decade on the ground as the Director of Sustainability and Resilience, the mayor's chief for this work in Orlando, Florida, and I served as the also advisor to our utility, where we owned a municipally owned and operated utility in Orlando, and worked on supporting them in their transition of the energy integrated resources planning work. How's the future grid going to evolve, and even the development of over 150 megawatts of utility scale solar and storage projects during my tenure. So I'm coming at this very much from a pragmatic standpoint of passing policies, programs, and implementing partnerships to accelerate climate action at the local level, and really use clean energy as an economic development driver for all of this work. And it's probably not news to you all, but at the Department of Energy, our focus is trying to align with President Biden and Vice President Harris's goals for climate and clean energy, and doing our part to accelerate this transition. And you can see here, these are the three North Stars that we are all working towards at the Department of Energy. First and foremost, achieving the short-term emission reduction of 50 to 52% of our emissions compared to 2005 levels by 2030, continuing on to achieve 100% electricity grid powered by carbon-free energy sources by 2035, and continuing our path towards a net zero economy here in America by 2050 or sooner. These are the science-based targets. We know, obviously, especially over the last couple of weeks, the science has come out with even more stark and dire urgency for the work that we're doing, and some of them even stating that we're already breaching the 1.5 degree rise in temperature from pre-industrial levels. So we have still a lot of work to do, but the good news is over the course of the last 2 years, President Biden and this administration and Congress have truly delivered in the most historic way we've ever seen in history. because of these three laws that you see here, starting with the bipartisan infrastructure law, which really was focused on trying to invest in our workers, in investing in building clean tech infrastructure as an industrial economic strategy for America, and ultimately ensuring that that infrastructure is resilient to the already existing extreme weather and climate impacts that we're facing, right? So that was really the focus of the bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law. Then the CHIPS and Science Act came about, really to start to onshore the critical minerals and supply and boost domestic manufacturing here in the United States, specifically around this topic of clean energy. We know that everything from solar panels to electric vehicles to our inverters to all these clean tech that we're trying to install, heat pumps and the like, they all require semiconductor chips. And we're often dependent on external sources to get that. And so we need to lead the charge. And that investment was massive to boost domestic manufacturing. And lastly, certainly not least, is the Inflation Reduction Act. As mentioned earlier on, this is the largest major investment in climate and clean energy. And it's really focused on supporting households and businesses, right? By unlocking billions, if not potentially trillions worth of tax credits, consumer rebates, and even other financial tools that help to bring about low-cost capital into the marketplace, and really pull clean tech from the fringes into the mainstream, right? This is really what it's about. And at the core of the IRA is advancing environmental justice and doing this transition in a way that really addresses those who have been overburdened, under-resourced, underinvested, and obviously furthest behind in the opportunities ahead. So, $500 billion across the federal government family, $100 billion of that came to the Department of Energy. And really quickly, our secretary, Jennifer Granholm, realized that this $100 billion is coming with a new mission tag, a mission that's focused on, again, equitable deployment. And something I've learned in this role is that Department of Energy has really at its core been a research and development organization and agency since its inception. It primarily 80 to 90% of its annual budget from Congress goes to research and development across our 17 national labs, across our partnership universities, and really doing the cutting edge scientific research to get technologies to be commercialized, to get us to be safer with these resources, and of course to protect us from a national security standpoint, right? So traditionally, this agency is really an R&D agency, and all of a sudden, this new money is focused on demonstration and deployment to mission scopes that really haven't been part of DOE's core. And so the secretary quickly, as you can see here, everything in gold on this chart is new to the Department of Energy as of the last 2 years. And it's really a creation of a brand new office, the Undersecretary for Infrastructure, which really unlocked the creation of a couple of other program offices that are needed to truly and equitably address this clean energy transition and to deploy the money that we just got in a way that's meaningful and intentional, right? And so, again, the creation of this new pillar, S3, which is that S3, right? This new pillar is the Undersecretary for Infrastructure. And you can see here that it actually is 9 different program offices, some of which have come from different parts of the department historically, some of which are brand new in their creation. And ultimately, this pillar of DOE, again, is not so much worried about the research and development side of the house, but how do we take those solutions and take them into the mainstream and commercialize them and deploy clean energy infrastructure as, again, this economic industrial strategy. The infrastructure office mission really focuses on these 4 key buckets. One is, how do we focus on lowering household energy bills and those for our businesses? So a lot of the funding in infrastructure that we have is going towards making improvements to our buildings and to our homes that ultimately lower that cost and lower the emissions profile. Secondly, by doing this, we're here to actually spur good jobs and boost that energy supply chain that we talked about here. And there's an assessment that has been done on just the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. Both of these together have the potential of creating 9 million new jobs between now and 2030 just in this clean energy transition. So a big part of the focus is job creation. Third, how do we ensure that we are actually demonstrating what has been lab scale solutions into the real world? And good examples of this is the investments that we're making around the hydrogen economy, and also direct air capture and long duration energy storage, which we know we're going to need in order to make this pivot to a carbon-free energy future, right? Lastly, and certainly not least, is around making sure that as we're building this new infrastructure, we're expanding the grid, we're installing all these distributed energy resources like rooftop solar and EV charging, that as we do that, we need to make sure that all of those systems are secure, they're reliable, they're affordable, and they're resilient. These are the four domains of the energy system that we're really trying to ensure we're advancing as we're moving towards this sustainable clean energy future, right? So these are the four domains of the infrastructure office. And again, this 100 billion that came to DOE covers a huge spectrum of investments that we're needing to make, from the energy storage to expanding the grid to investing in our workforce to helping states, locals, and tribal governments with their resources, and many, many more. And on top of, by the way, the 100 billion in grants, there's also 250 billion in loans and loan guarantees. Most people don't realize that DOE has almost a bank arm of the agency that helps to provide low-cost capital, low-cost loans to innovative projects that help us to make this big transition. Tesla, the electric vehicle automaker, is an example of, back in the early 2000s, receiving a loan programs office loan from DOE that helped them build their first manufacturing plant, their first battery plant, which then took them to basically being, one of the most valuable automakers in the world today, right? In about a decade. So all this infrastructure funding. Now, it would be for naught if we weren't intentional about how this money is going out. And I wanted to touch on a couple of really challenging environmental justice areas that we've focused on in energy, and we feel are critical to address as we're deploying all this money. First and foremost is the aspect of that our communities of color are disproportionately facing higher levels of air pollution throughout our communities. This is caused obviously by the consumption of goods and services, and primarily, transportation emissions, because these communities are either surrounded by highways or often bifurcated by highways, and many, many other reasons. And there is scientific fact and studies that show this disproportionate impact, specifically looking in this case at particulate matter 2.5, which is known to cause asthma and COPD and other respiratory illnesses, right? So when we're looking at this issue, we realize that there's a disproportionate aspect as it relates to air quality. Secondly, from an energy burden standpoint, energy burden is often defined as the percentage of your overall income that goes towards utilities and towards energy, right? On average, 3 to 4% we're seeing across the country is the average energy burden for an individual person. But when you're looking at communities of color, we're beginning to realize Hispanics, non-Native American, Black, and even renter populations often have disproportionate higher energy burden. Sometimes it's 8, 10, 12% of their limited monthly income going towards utilities. And there's a lot of reasons behind this. There's a split incentive, often between the landlord who owns it and the renter. There is challenges in accessing low-cost financing to make improvements to, let's say, their appliances or their air conditioning systems, which happen to be a big part of your utility bill. So there's a number of things that we're realizing, but the fact of the matter is, when you look at every major community across this country, there is a very clear and stark difference between the energy burden of our white households and those of our colored households. And so energy burden is a big focus of ours. Thirdly is this access to clean energy. And when we've studied the rooftop solar adoption in across the country, we're seeing that Black and Hispanic majority census tracts have installed less rooftop solar compared to non-majority tracts. And so there are a lot of challenges with this. I just mentioned the lack of access to low-cost capital, low-cost financing that helps individuals get into realizing the benefits of solar energy. But at the end of the day, clean energy access is disproportionate. And what we're trying to do is close that gap and make sure that everybody equitably has access to resources to take advantage of clean energy, which we know improves public health, which we know lowers cost, which we know addresses the climate. and many other things. The last thing I wanted to mention on the injustice that we're seeing is really the climate injustice. The fact that we know, and this is true about North-South divide, about developed versus developing countries, and how the developing countries are the ones, basically facing the brunt of the impact of climate change today, but are marginally, contributing to that problem. And we're also seeing that actually in many of the socially vulnerable groups that are examined across the country, minorities that often have higher levels of climate change impacts. They're usually, the highest on the front end. They have the highest energy burdens. During the issue, they are the longest to essentially recover from a storm, right? And then the aftermath, they often don't ever get back to par. And so when you look across the spectrum, these socially vulnerable groups have these disproportionate high levels of climate impacts compared to their counterparts. So these are really important injustices that really provide us the foundation, the important understanding around how to design these programs at DOE to ensure that we're addressing these types of vulnerabilities, right? And that brings me to Justice 40. Obviously, this is one of the most important policy changes that President Biden issued in his first week in office. This Executive Order 14008 initiated the Justice 40 initiative, which basically, in a nutshell, says that 40% of the overall benefits of these investments, of the BIL, of the IRA, of the CHIPS Act, that 40% at minimum flow to historically disadvantaged communities, those that have been marginalized, they've been underinvested, they've been overburdened by pollution. And ultimately, the goal is to figure out how this money can actually flow to those census. Now, how do we go about identifying which community falls in a Justice 40 designation? And very early on, the White House Council on Environmental Quality created the CJIS tool, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. It's a snapshot that you see there on the screen. And this identifies the census tracts that essentially are overwhelmed and underserved across our nation. And so you can go to this map, you can type in either an address or the name of a city, and it will zoom into that location and outline in dark gray, as you can see there, different parts of the community that essentially are considered Justice 40 communities because of certain criteria. And as you can see, it's not just whether it's energy burden or they don't have access to clean energy. It touches everything from legacy pollution, transportation burden, workforce and access to jobs, health issues, and many other things that contribute to whether a community is designated as Justice 40 or not. The goal is to ensure that as states and local governments and tribes are bringing down their dollars, that they're using this mapping tool and saying, okay, I can have the biggest impact in my city by getting this clean energy money and appropriating it over here, where they have the highest energy burden in my community, and we can help by lowering cost and improving health in those areas versus just blanketing it, keeping it open for anyone within their community to access. This is a big change up compared to how historically any other administration in the past has addressed not just energy and climate, but equitably transitioning using these federal public dollars. The other important thing, and you're going to hear from some other guest speakers at DOE over the course of this semester, but one of the things that we've done at DOE to ensure that this is happening isn't just to kind of create a map and say, hey, you should use the map and figure out where it goes, but we actually require what's called community benefit plans, CBPs. Community benefit plans are a requirement for any DOE application. If you're applying to the Hydrogen Hubs grant, if you're applying for funding for schools, any grant application requires that the applicant develops a community benefits plan, that they think intentionally through these 4 criteria. How is this project going to advance Justice 40 and actually achieve the 40% minimum going to these historically disadvantaged communities? 2, how is my project incorporating diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, these wealth building opportunities that we have in front of us? How are we ensuring that we're intentionally bringing them in? 3rd, good jobs. It's not just about creating jobs, but really careers is really what we're trying to do, right? Attract and retain skilled workers in the clean energy transition movement. And this is all about what are their wages, their working conditions, the safety of their working condition, et cetera. And lastly, agreements, actual workforce and community agreements between the project team that's applying for money and the community to make sure that everything that they're talking about and that they're proposing in their application actually happens, and that we follow and track and have accountability to what they're saying, whether they're going to hire a certain number of people from this community, whether they're going to ensure that the revenues from this project helps to flow to this community a certain amount for whatever reason. These are things, and it's not just a nice to have. As you can see there in the blue box, community benefit plans equate to upwards of 20% of the technical merit review of a project proposal. So anybody who's reviewing, 20% or a fifth of your application is dependent on how intentional am I being with community benefits and ensuring that this project will support those who have been historically disadvantaged, right? This is a big deal. So I hope that gives you an idea of, how we're trying to be intentional, what tools we've created to demystify where those investments should be, and then how we're incorporating into the application, into the program design, that justice and equity is front and center. It's 20% of what you propose. And I guarantee you, if you're not intentional about it, those applications are not going to be awarded. So that gives you a little background on the evolution that DOE is going through and really how we're centering Justice 40. With the remainder of my time, I want to introduce this new office, the Office of State and Community Energy Programs. This is the office I have the quite honor and privilege of serving as the Chief of Staff. I'm the inaugural Chief of Staff. I came in July of 2022 with a presidential appointment, taking me out of the city of Orlando and essentially putting me here at DOE to create this brand new from scratch office. And the whole focus of SCEP is to be Department of Energy's front door for the states, for our tribes, for our local governments and community serving institutions. And our goal is to provide funding and technical assistance to those stakeholders to help them with this transition to an equitable clean energy future. SCEP manages a pretty wide-ranging portfolio. We manage $16 billion. Of that $100 billion that came to DOE, 16 of it is coming to this office alone. And the cool thing about SCEP that I really enjoy is that it's a technology agnostic office. It's an office isn't just focused on solar or electric vehicles or retrofitting our low-income homes. It's an office that's intending to bring all of the tools in DOE's tool belt to the table, to a place, to a community, to a state, and helps them meet them where they're at and identify how to help them accelerate to that next move the needle to driving clean energy. This gives you a little snapshot from an org chart perspective of how SCEP is organized. And I just wanted to show you that we basically have these 5 divisions within SCEP. And they range from all the way in the far left, the Weatherization Assistance Program, longest serving energy efficiency program in the history of DOE, 45 plus years. And that has been going for a long time. It then merged into SCEP, right, as a foundational anchor. We also have the state energy program, that second pillar. Those two are formula grants, and they go every single year across the country to all 50 states, 5 territories, and DC. So it's annual money that's flowing. Because of the BIL and the IRA, the third column was created, the community energy programs, and also the partnerships pillar there, where you see the Inflation Reduction Act, home energy rebates and building codes provisions. So very quickly, I wanted to take you through, how SCEP delivers this work. And I'll say the $16 billion is organized into 28 different grant programs, so different funding opportunities. And you can see they range from supporting nonprofit organizations to new money for local schools and school districts across the country, to helping out with building workforce development and training, all the way to household resources. Those big weatherization and the home energy rebates are resources that flow literally into somebody's household and helps them lower their costs. So the unique aspect of SCEP is that we touch a lot of different funding streams that support a bunch of different stakeholders. Again, schools, nonprofits, states, tribes, local governments, universities, all the way down to the household. And again, doing so with this technology agnostic mindset. So really quickly, One of our core customers in SCEP is our states. Much of our dollars flows through the state energy office, and that state energy office then takes the money and opens those dollars up to local governments and others within their community. And here is a snapshot of some of the key grant programs that the states are managing. They do manage the state energy program at the top right, and a revolving loan program. So we have a grant that helps them create green banks in every state so that they can offer those low-cost loans to local governments, to nonprofits, to make clean energy projects work. We also have a huge grant for building codes and helping our states and even local governments with code authority improve their building codes and move to the latest, most efficient, most resilient energy code that's on the market, right? And so we have a number of resources that helps them through that. And at the bottom right there, you can see a lot of resources for training and trying to unlock new grants to train energy auditors, to train apprenticeships in who are installing energy technologies in buildings. And so a big part of our world is enhancing capacity for states. We also have been working to enhance the capacity of local governments and communities. Normally, DOE doesn't have any dollars that go directly to a local government. Because of the bipartisan infrastructure law, it unlocked a really massive grant called EECBG that stands for Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. It's the largest grant at DOE, goes to 2,708 entities across the country. And over the course of the last 6 months, we've been able to unlock upwards of $74 million thus far. Every single month, we are awarding another round of between 30 and 50 new communities getting their money. And the exciting thing is every single month this year and probably next year, we're going to be giving out this clean energy money for these communities to be able to invest in all types of projects. It could be retrofitting their own municipal buildings. It could be installing charging stations for the public. It could be rebating for their consumers to install rooftop solar. It really is open-ended in terms of how this money is being used. So it's very flexible. The other thing we're thinking about for communities is how do we place fellows? How do we place capacity for tribes and local governments, many of which have never hired a sustainability officer or director. They've never maybe engaged with DOE in their history, and all of a sudden there's money that they can accept, but they don't have the institutional knowledge. They've never gone through that process. So what we've been trying to do is unlock some of our technical assistance money to hire fellows in communities. And one of those is called the Community Energy Fellows Program, where we're placing on-site capacity. And these individuals for 18 months to 2 years are able to support that local government with the planning, convening with their core partners, and even writing grants to bring down money and do clean energy projects. So local government capacity is big. And then thirdly, of course, tribes. Tribal governments, there's 574 federally recognized tribes, and there's another 200 tribes in Alaska and Alaska Native villages. So together between Alaska and the 48, there's about 774 individual tribal nations across America. And there hasn't been a lot of resources ever dedicated to tribes. But now in SCEP, we actually have 2 grant programs that are 100% dedicated to the tribal nations to go through this clean energy transition. You can see we have money for rebates, and we have money for the EECBG grant so that they can do all types of projects. And so we're excited that there's starting to be carve-outs for tribal governments, knowing that they're really the furthest behind. They often, don't have a lot of the capacity to be able to do this work. All right, I got a couple more slides for you. In addition to states, communities, tribes, I mentioned that we also have money for community serving institutions, that we're getting further into communities with SCEP's dollars. And one of the most exciting, in my opinion, grants that we have is Renew America's Schools. This is $500 million that's flowing to K-12 schools across the country to reduce cost and improve health. And thus far, we've done 1 round of selections. We gave out $178 million last year to 24 school districts, basically that are doing over 90 buildings, retrofitting over 90 buildings, supporting 74,000 students and upwards of 5,000 teachers benefiting from these clean energy projects. I'm excited to share that the next round of Renew America Schools opens up next month or early April, and we're going to open it up for more school districts to get money to do all types of projects. Some school districts are getting ready for electric buses, and they're using our money to install the charging stations for the buses that then they're getting from the EPA Clean School Bus Grant, and they're able to actually use both agencies to help them with the transition. I really liked that proposal. Others are just adding rooftop solar or installing battery sources so that when the grid goes down, the school becomes a resilience hub and can act as an emergency shelter. So there's so many different flavors of solutions that we're seeing from these schools and from all of these applicants. And that's the whole goal. Find these best practices, create resources that then could be evergreen and could be replicated across the country. And in addition to schools, we're supporting nonprofit 501c3s. Think about your food shelters, your soup kitchens, your homeless shelters, your childcare facilities. These are all nonprofit organizations that often they're very limited in their resources to do things around retrofitting their building to save money, right? But it's one of the best things that they can do to put more of their limited money to their mission. Too often we're sending too much of it to the utilities, right? Because we're wasting energy. So we're managing the Renew America's Nonprofits grant here in SCEP. And the unique aspect about this grant is we actually have nine prime nonprofits. They've already been selected. You can see them there on the right. And they're charged with going out and creating a portfolio of smaller nonprofits that they're going to help retrofit. So there's over 300 facilities across 28 states that are going to be supported by the 9 prime nonprofits. So it's nonprofits helping nonprofits go through this clean energy transition, which I also really love. We're supporting the clean energy workforce. There are 4 grants in SCEP that are about training energy auditors, helping to train those who are installing, contractors who are installing these clean technologies in our homes, like heat pumps and heat pump water heaters and battery storage. You got to make sure that the contractors know how to install these solutions, or else you're going to have this unintended consequence of using maybe more energy than before we retrofitted, right? So we have to do so intentionally, and SCEP manages a lot of the money that is going to start to flow to our communities to help train contractors. And the last big area of SCEP is really down to the household. I talked about the weatherization assistance program. And normally weatherization includes things like, sealing your windows and doors and ensuring that your ductwork is not broken or has holes in it, right? Or, trying to retune your air conditioning systems. Weatherization does these low and no cost improvements that helps keep your home, quite frankly, cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter, right? And the WAP program, the weatherization program, really targets those of lowest income. 80% of the area median income and below can benefit, and only those can benefit from WAP. So the cool thing is we're starting to innovate on top of your traditional air sealing, duct sealing, etc. We're starting to think about, well, how do we electrify the homes that we're weatherizing and taking gas out of the homes? How do we start coupling them with rooftop solar in addition to weatherizing, so that they not only can get enhanced indoor quality, but also really a reduction drastically in their energy burden. So SCEP is managing a few different innovation grant programs for weatherization to go above and beyond. And we're excited to see what lessons learned we're going to get from this as we move forward. I know that I'm running up on time here, but one of the big IRA, enabling, solutions is the tax credits. And I just wanted to point out that now there are a tremendous amount of new tax credits for consumers. That means you all. And that includes things like, now there's a tax credit for energy auditing. Often people are like, well, where do I start? How do I start saving energy in the most cost-effective way? Well, first step is do an assessment of your home. And now there's $150 that usually is about the cost to do that for you as a tax credit. So it almost waives that cost. Also, solar and now battery storage are, upwards of 30% of your investment you can get back. And now, of course, used and new EVs, right? I think one of the biggest things, though, that came out of the IRA, in addition to consumer tax credits, is what's called elective pay. Okay, this is a big deal. Elective pay now allows tax-exempt entities, universities, schools, nonprofits, local governments, tribes. It allows them to take advantage of tax credits. Normally, you have to have a tax appetite in order to take advantage of a tax credit. So these nonprofit entities that don't pay taxes can't get a tax credit because I don't pay taxes, right? Well, now the IRA unlocked what's called elective pay, which allows a tax-exempt entity to get cash in lieu of credit. So again, if I'm spending $1 million on a solar project for my city, I can get back $300,000 that next year as a cash rebate from the IRS. Normally, that local government had to keep that 30% and basically just eat it because they didn't pay taxes, right? The amount of millions I could have taken back for the city of Orlando after installing a bunch of solar, I can't even add it up yet. It's amazing what is happening with elective pay. And ultimately, there are 12 different credits that these tax-exempt entities can take advantage of. It's all of the rooftop solar and storage ones, but it's also commercial clean vehicles. If a university wants to start to transition all of their fleet vehicles to electric, guess what? They can now take advantage of a tax credit that they never had access to before. This, in my opinion, is one of the biggest things to hit the IRA to our market, because it's taken a marketplace that has been in the dark, right? The universities, the schools, the nonprofits, and now bringing them into the light and allowing them to take advantage of all the, basically tax credits and clean energy being on sale for the next 10 years, right? In closing, there is a huge mission ahead for all of us to ensure that not only is this money going out, but it's landing and driving the impact that all of us are trying to do, that I've been talking about this whole time. And so one last scope of mission for SCEP is technical assistance. That means everything that we can to provide to these stakeholders so that they can use the money most effectively. We create tools for them. We have cohorts and peer exchanges that we convene so that they can share best practices. We also provide data and information like the Justice 40 tool that they can use to reach those goals. And so there's a number of things in SCEP that we have. There's this great tool called SLOPE, State and Local Planning for Energy Platform. Over 50 different data indicators that a state or a community can use to kind of forecast out how their energy profile is going to change. And even the LEAD tool, low-income energy affordability data, similar to the CGIST, but it helps get down to specific energy burden criteria down to the block, not just census tract, but down to the block. So a lot of tools. Our office is also lifting up this office of community engagement. We don't have enough time to really get into it, but it's a new type of almost tiger team that's intended to be a navigator for states, communities, local governments that are trying to access this money. And so in SCEP, we've created a whole team, and they're across this region. As you can see, there's our team there. And ultimately, they're touching a different region of the country and supporting the navigation of resources and funding across the country. So we're really trying to bring about resources to help this system. Lastly is the Energy Savings Hub. For you all as consumers, you're probably asking yourself, what can I take advantage of in my own home? If I'm a renter, can I get access to any of these tax credits? The good news is the answer is yes to that. And if you go to energy.gov/save, we've created a one-stop shop hub for consumers to navigate the tax credits and the rebates and all of these benefits that you might be able to access. And so I really want to push you to that website, and also make sure to sign up to our newsletter in SCEP. Every single month, we're sending out an incredible newsletter that's curating all of the resources for state and local governments. And I think it'll keep your finger on the pulse. And if you're not following Jennifer Granholm, our secretary, or even the Department of Energy on LinkedIn, on Twitter, or X, I highly encourage you to do so, because you'll quickly realize there is so much happening. I'm just giving you, high level scratch of the surface of what's happening here at the department, but it is truly incredible. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to you all, and maybe we could dive into a couple of questions before I have to head out. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. We have a couple questions from our online audience before we wrap that up. I'll just combine them into I'll just say them right away. Just one is, can you please speak about if and how utilities are coming to the table to be an effective partner to optimize the programs and initiatives you discussed? And the second one is, how much consultation with environmental justice communities and local communities have you engaged in, do you engage in to design these programs? Those are online questions. When we're done with those, we'll wrap it up and go to the student-based link.
Excellent questions. So yes, on the utility side, we know that the utilities and even the regulators play a critical role in this transition. There are many things that utilities are starting to think about in terms of ways to better optimize the assets that they've invested in already, the power plants, the transmission facilities, the substations. And one of the ways that we've been engaging them is actually through the Loan Programs Office. They have an initiative that they lead at the department called Virtual Power Plants, or VPPs for short. This is essentially, in a nutshell, to define virtual power plants, it's about aggregating all of the distributed energy resources we have, let's say, in a service territory. The rooftop solar and the inverter, the charging stations that we have, programmable thermostats for our air conditioning and heating systems. These are all essentially assets that are part of the grid one way or another. They're on the demand side of the house, but they're part of the grid. And what the utilities are starting to think about is how can we mitigate the peaks that we're seeing across our territories by actually better utilizing the assets that we've invested in and that other customers have invested in. So VPPs help you to aggregate all of these distributed energy resources into essentially an ability of reducing load on the demand side. And there's actually a few utilities that are beginning to move forward with rate cases that ultimately are helping them move in this direction. The question becomes, is there a benefit for the consumer, right? This is first and foremost in my mind, like, what is this going to reduce my cost? Is this going to get me better, more efficient appliances somehow? What is it going to be for the end user that's going to benefit from this new type of virtual power plant? And the answer is yes, in different ways. The end user ultimately is the one that's going to benefit. Actually, the utility as well, but the end user too. In a couple of ways. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but that's one way that utilities are, very much at the table, working closely with DOE to determine what is it that we need to be investing in order to actually make virtual power plants a real part of the solution. And I point you to a lift-off report that we published last fall. It's the virtual power plant lift-off report at DOE. And it basically identifies what are the things we need to invest in order to actually commercialize this as a real solution. But a lot of the rate increases that we're seeing across the country are because we're trying to invest in infrastructure to meet this peak, when there might actually be a better way to meet those peaks and reduce or at least mitigate any rate hikes on customers, right? So that's one that I'm pretty excited about. And then as it relates to engaging communities in the process, yeah. So I talked about the community benefit plans and community benefit agreements. Certainly, as we were developing the idea of a community benefit plan, our Office of Policy and Environmental and the Energy Justice and Equity, now known as EJE office at DOE, did a series of listening sessions, roundtables, webinars with community-based organizations to determine what are what's the framework of a community development plan, how should we go about, what's the methodology to assess whether a plan meets the mark or not. And all of that input came together to create the template that we now have as community development plans for every grant at DOE. And ultimately, again, the merit review process really is focused on whether those plans are, complete, and they've done, an inclusive job at bringing voices from the community to that proposal, and clearly identify how the benefits of this infrastructure will flow into those communities. And I think, lastly, I'll say that we're also trying to get further into community with DOE to continue this feedback loop. And the EJE office, our Energy Justice and Equity office, hosts these, what we call Energy Justice to the People roadshows. We're actually going to be kicking off our 4th roadshow event in the New Orleans kind of River Charles kind of basin there within the New Orleans area. And there's going to be, CEO roundtables, there's going to be community-based listening sessions, and even a whole workshop on how to create a community benefit plan with community members and with applicants that are looking to get funding, right? So really trying to bring them, be a convener, and start working on these plans, together. So those are some ways in which we, try to bring community voices to the table, and there are many others.
All right, well, thank you, Chris. With that, we're going to wrap up our online audience and shift to the classroom setting. Thank you, and see you next week, online participants.